Easter greetings, everyone. Christos Anesti. The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord, descending from heaven, came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised. As he said, come see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers and sisters to go to Galilee. There they will see me." The Gospel of the Lord. Matthew 28, 1 through 10, our passage, is one of those passages where the literary artistry, the theological daring, the historical layers all converge. It's this great moment where Matthew lets the resurrection erupt into history with what can only be called cosmic force. So let's dig into the passage with some depth. We'll look at several things. As always, the historical setting, the context in Matthew, the literary setting, some translation points, and then we'll look at some other readings of it as well. Matthew's resurrection narrative is the most dramatic of the four Gospels. It reflects a Jewish Christian community who's wrestling with their own conflicts within the synagogue. It reflects a desire to affirm their continuity with Israel's scriptures, while at the same time asserting Jesus as the climax of God's saving work. And it's also a polemic against competing explanations of the empty tomb that were circulating in the first century. Matthew's community likely lived in the aftermath of the destruction of the temple in the year 70, where questions of authority, identity, and God's presence were all burning with them. This passage is Matthew's answer. God's presence has not vanished. The temple may be gone, but God's presence has indeed broken open the world in this resurrection of Jesus. Verses 1 through 4, we have this cosmic theophany. The women arrive, it says, after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning. Matthew here emphasizes a new creation imagery. It's the dawn of a new age. This great earthquake occurs. And in Matthew, earthquakes always accompany divine revelation. It's also Sinai language. It's apocalyptic language. It's a new Exodus language. The angel descends, rolls back the stone, and then sits on it. And in Matthew, sitting is always what authority looks like. Everybody else may stand. The authority sits. Jesus sits to deliver sermons. And the stone isn't rolled away for Jesus to escape. It's rolled away so that the women can see. Then it tells us that the guards shake and they become like dead men. Now that's Matthew's irony. The dead have become alive, and the living are now like the dead. Matthew loves those kind of reversals. Then we see the angel's commission to the women. He addresses them and says, "Do not be afraid." That's standard theophany reassurance. That's what the angels will say to the shepherds. That's what Jesus says walking on the water toward the boat, or it's always, "Don't be afraid." And he says, "I know you were looking for Jesus who was crucified." And Matthew insists on this continuity. The risen one is also the crucified one. He is not here. He has been raised. It's a divine passive. God has acted. He is not here because God has raised him. Then the angel gives the mission. Come, see the place, then go quickly, tell his disciples, and he is going ahead of you to Galilee. Galilee is crucial. It's the place of Jesus' ministry. It symbolizes a mission to the nations. And the resurrection pushes the disciples back to the margins, not to the center of Jerusalem, where Jerusalem is. No, back out to the edges. That's where the mission takes place. Then we see the women meet Jesus. The women leave with fear and great joy, which is a perfect pairing that Matthew uses. It's awe and hope. And Jesus meets him. What do? They grasp his feet. That's a physical, embodied resurrection. They worship him. Matthew's Christology is unambiguous, high Christology. And then Jesus repeats the angel's message. Don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers and sisters. And brothers shows this reconciliation after the disciples have failed so miserably. Peter denying 3 times, the disciples scattering. But he still calls them brothers. And then he says they will see me in Galilee. This double commission of the angel and Jesus underscores the reliability of the women's witness. See, you need two confirming witnesses. And so the women have both the angel and Jesus. The apocalyptic imagery here, the theophany of the appearance of God. Matthew's resurrection is not quiet. It's cosmic. There's an earthquake. There's a radiant angel. There's the guards collapsing. And there's a stone rolled away. This is a noisy resurrection. It's the same language that was used in Sinai in Exodus chapter 19. This is the same that we saw in the visions of Daniel, Zechariah's eschatological earthquakes that he saw, and the day of the Lord that appears over and over through the Hebrew prophets. And Matthew frames the resurrection as God's decisive intervention in history. The women become the first witnesses. That's an important theme. Matthew preserves the tradition of women as the first to encounter the risen Jesus. Now, that's historically plausible, given the embarrassment factor in ancient patriarchal cultures, but it was theologically intentional. They were the last at the cross. They were the first at the tomb. They were the first commissioned apostles to the apostles. Matthew very subtly elevates the authority of women over the male disciples who had fled. In Matthew's story, the empty tomb, Matthew's the only one who includes the guards in the story. That reflects a historical controversy between early Christians and other Jewish groups concerning the empty tomb. Matthew's trying to rebut the claim that the disciples stole the body. And you have the guards' paralysis, falling like dead men, contrasting with the women's courage. Are they scared? Yeah, they're scared. But courage isn't the absence of fear, as we all know, it's the overcoming of fear. Galilee, then, becomes important as a theological geography. Galilee, like I said, is the place of Jesus' ministry. It's the site of the Great Commission. It's a symbol of mission beyond Israel. And it's, again, a return to the margins, not the center of power. Matthew's resurrection story is not about triumph in Jerusalem, but mission from the outskirts. I like the passage where it talks about the women take hold of his feet. This is clearly not a ghost. Matthew's insisting that this is a bodily resurrection, and worship is the only proper response to the risen Christ. Matthew draws on a shared early tradition of women discovering the early tomb, the early tomb. There's traditions of resurrection appearances in Galilee. There are these apocalyptic motifs that were common in Jewish literature. But mostly Matthew is drawing on his own theological creativity, the earthquake, the angel, the guards. And for him, resurrection is vindication. In Jewish thought, resurrection is the divine stamp of approval on the righteous sufferer. And Matthew is presenting Jesus as the vindicated Son of Man, like we see in Daniel chapter 7. Fear and joy play a role here. These emotions reflect the awe of encountering divine power in the first place, the joy of hope fulfilled, and the tension of living between resurrection and mission. Again, the angel. That description, like lightning, white as snow, it echoes Daniel chapter 10. It echoes the theophanies that we see in the book of Exodus, but it also reminds us of Matthew's own narrative of the Transfiguration. Matthew is weaving this tapestry of scriptural echoes to show continuity with Israel's story. So what are the implications? Well, we see resurrection as new creation. The dawn, the earthquake, the angelic descent, all evoke Genesis and Exodus. And Matthew frames the resurrection as the beginning of God's new world. We see revelation to the marginalized. It's women who receive the first revelation. Galilee becomes the center of mission. And Matthew's gospel consistently elevates the overlooked. We look at Jesus, the risen Jesus, as Emmanuel also, not just Jesus in the manger. The whole gospel begins with God with us in chapter 1, verse 23. And it ends with Jesus appearing to women and promising presence in Galilee. That Emmanuel theme serves as bookends between the whole narrative. And the mission that the women experience and are to carry to the other disciples, it flows from this encounter. Their encounter leads them to proclamation. The disciples' encounter in Galilee will lead them to the Great Commission. Resurrection, encounter, worship, and mission. Matthew 28, 1 through 10, our passage, is not just a resurrection report. It's a theological eruption, a new Sinai, a new creation, a new Exodus, a new commissioning. And Matthew entrusts this revelation not to the powerful, but to the faithful women who never left. It's a passage that insists that God's world-shaking work begins at the margins, in the dawn, with those who show up. Feminist, liberation, and Black theology don't just add to it, they expose what's been hiding in plain sight. Feminist theology will focus on women and bodies and authority. The women as the first apostles, centering on women. A feminist reading starts by refusing to treat the women as narrative accessories. They are the ones who have stayed at the cross. They're the ones who watched the burial. They're the ones who come to the tomb. They're the ones who receive the revelation, and they're the ones who are commissioned to speak. They become, as St. Augustine called Mary Magdalene, the postula apostolorum, the apostle of the apostles, the apostle to the apostles. The angel and Jesus both entrust them with the message. Feminist theology names this plainly. They function as apostles, even when later church structures try to erase all that. And we could go on, and I certainly could, about the moving of Mary Magdalene from the first apostle to a redeemed prostitute. She was not. Feminist theology also focuses on bodies and touch and resurrection, like we talked about, the grasping of the feet. The women take hold of his feet. That's a deeply bodily moment. And feminist theology is paying attention to women's bodies as the site of truth, not shame, not like later popes tried to make Mary Magdalene. She was not to be shamed. She embodied the truth. And the fact that the first encounter with the risen Christ is tactile, embodied, and initiated by women. This resists any spiritualizing of resurrection that sidelines the real vulnerable bodies, especially women's bodies. Using this feminist hermeneutic, we see suspicion. We ask how the patriarchal interpretation has minimized the women, turning them into sentimental figures instead of these authoritative witnesses. And they reclaim, through feminist theology, women reclaim their leadership as normative, not exceptional. And the text itself supports this. This is a later tradition that is suppressed by the patriarchy. So a feminist reading says, this is not a cute story about faithful women. It's a direct challenge to any church that denies women's authority to preach, to lead, and to bear the gospel. What does the liberation theology say? Well, they see resurrection as political rupture. The earthquake is social upheaval. The great earthquake isn't just special effects in a Steven Spielberg movie. It's liberation theology hears it as a symbol of God shaking oppressive orders. It's the destabilizing of imperial and religious power that executed Jesus. The guards, they're agents of the state, and they collapse like dead men, while the crucified one, the suffering one, lives. That's a political reversal. From crucifixion victim to risen Lord, liberation in theology insists that the one raised is the one crucified by empire. Resurrection is God's no to state violence and to religious complicity. Matthew's emphasis on Jesus who was crucified keeps the wounds in view. There's no cheap triumphalism here, like we see in Christian nationalism. But what we have is the vindication of a tortured body in Revelation. And I saw the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and he looked like a lamb who had been slaughtered. For liberation theology, Galilee in the margins Galilee's not just neutral geography, it's the periphery, it's the outside, the place of peasants, the place of mixed population, the place of economic questionableness, insecurity. The risen Jesus sends the disciples back to Galilee, not to seize Jerusalem's power, but to launch a movement from the margins. Liberation theology hears this as a call. God's new world begins among the poor, not in the palace. So here, resurrection is not life after death in the abstract. It is God's uprising against systems that crucify. Black theology, which was the first theology that I read as a young man, talking about race and gender and survival, reading with crucified people. Black theology often reads the cross and the resurrection through the experience of enslavement, mass incarceration, structural racism, and lynching. James Cone's great and final book was The Cross as the Lynching Tree. White people need to wake up. This isn't our gospel. This belongs to all of us. In Black theology, Jesus is the one lynched by the empire. And resurrection is God's solidarity with with Black suffering, and God's refusal to let white supremacist death dealing have the last word. The guards are like dead men, and the risen Christ, the wounded Christ, echoes the reversal that Black theology longs to see. Those who wield death lose their power. Those who suffer are raised. When Black women read about the women at the tomb, it's also rooted in Black women's experience. Locks on to the women in this text. There's a triple oppression to look at. The women are under patriarchy. The Jewish subjects are under Roman occupation. The disciples are disciples of a condemned criminal. Yet, these women show up when the men flee. They hold the memory of Jesus' body. They become the first bearers of the resurrection news. We see this as the echo of Black women who have kept faith, kept families, kept communities alive, all through slavery, through Jim Crow, and through continuing racism. What's the pattern that they see? Those who labor, whose labor and whose loyalty are exploited and ignored are precisely those through whom God speaks most clearly. Matthew 28, 1 through 10 resonates here. The tomb becomes a kind of kitchen table moment, off the main stage of power, early in the morning, where women gather, grieve, and then receive a word that changes history. The fear and great joy they carry is deeply familiar to Black women who have lived with both terror and resilience. Across all these lenses, liberation theology, feminist theology, Black theology, there's a few threads that converge. Who speaks? Patriarchal, colonial, racist systems all try to control the narrative. Matthew quietly subverts all of this. The first credible witnesses are women from a subjugated people. The crucified body of Jesus and the vulnerable bodies of the women are central here. And feminist liberation and Black theology all insist God's work is known in wounded, threatened, and marginalized body, not in some kind of sanitized abstraction. Where revelation happens is not in the temple, not in the palace, not in the court, but at a guarded tomb at dawn, and then in Galilee. That maps onto barrios, plantations, ghettos, reservations, refugee camps, and all the Galilees of our world. What this text means to us is that Matthew 28 is not a safe Easter card. It's a summons. For the church, believe the women. Center the marginalized. Stop preaching resurrection while protecting the systems that crucify. And for communities under pressure, your survival, your showing up at the tomb of your history is not incidental to the story. It's where God speaks. Resurrection doesn't erase scars. It honors scars, and it turns them into sites of power. Christos anesti. Christ is risen.